Bon Scott, who replaced Dave Evans as the lead vocalist of AC/DC on October 24, 1974, has become one of the most influential names in the history of rock music. His extraordinary career with AC/DC not only catapulted the band to the pinnacle of fame, but also left an enduring legacy that is still felt today. Initially, Dave Evans held the position of lead vocalist. However, internal disagreements and differences in musical vision led to Evans leaving the band in 1974. Ronald Belford Scott was born on July 9, 1946, at Fyfe Jamieson Maternity Hospital in Forfar, Scotland. His parents were Charles Belford Scott and Isabelle Cunningham Mitchell. He grew up in Kirriemuir and was the second child in the Scott family. The family emigrated from Scotland to Australia in 1952. The Scott family lived in Sunshine, Victoria, a suburb of Melbourne. He acquired the nickname Bon shortly after starting school. Because there was another Ronald in his classmates changed it to Bonnie Scotland. 4 years later, his family moved to Fremantle, Western Australia. Bon Scott dropped out of school at the age of 15. He then worked as a farm labourer and later became an apprentice weighing machine mechanic. In 1963, Bon Scott's life was marred by his involvement in unlawful activities. He spent a brief period in the Fremantle Prison Assessment Centre and 9 months in the Riverbank Juvenile Institution. The charges he faced included giving a false name and address to the police, escaping lawful custody, unlawful carnal knowledge, and stealing 12 imperial gallons, 55 litres, of gasoline. Despite this, Scott's efforts to turn his life around by joining the Australian Army met with obstacles. He was rejected and deemed socially maladjusted by the military authorities. Scott's vocals were inspired by his idol, Little Richard. Scott started his first band, The Spectres, in 1964 as a drummer and occasionally as the lead singer. 2 years later, they joined forces with another local band, the Winstons, and formed the Valentines, where Scott became the lead singer alongside Vince Lovegrove. The Valentines recorded several songs written by George Young of the Easy Beats. In 1970, after securing a spot in the national top 30 with their single Juliet, the Valentines disbanded due to artistic differences following a highly publicized drug scandal. Scott moved to Adelaide in 1970 and joined the progressive rock group Fraternity. Fraternity released the albums Livestock and Flaming Gala. The band toured England in 1973. After returning from the tour, Fraternity took a break. Scott took a day job at the Wallaroo fertilizer plant and began singing with the Mount Lofty Rangers. Around 11 p.m. on May 3, 1974, at the Old Lion Hotel in North Adelaide, while rehearsing with the Mount Lofty Rangers, a heavily intoxicated Scott had a fierce argument with a band member. Scott rushed out of the venue, threw a bottle of Jack Daniels to the ground, and then rode off on his Suzuki GT 550 motorcycle. Scott suffered severe injuries from the motorcycle accident and spent 18 days in the hospital. During his recovery, Vince Lovegrove and his wife gave Scott part-time jobs, such as putting up posters and painting their office. With the dissolution of Fraternity and the Mount Lofty Rangers, Lovegrove introduced him to AC/DC, who were looking for a new singer. AC/DC experienced rapid growth, starting from Australia to the international stage. Their 1979 album, Highway to Hell, achieved great success in the United States, marking the band's commercial peak. However, on February 19, 1980, Scott died after a night out in London with former musician and suspected drug dealer Alistair Kinnear. Despite this, AC/DC did not give up. They recruited vocalist Brian Johnson from the English glam rock band Geordie. Only 5 months after Scott's death, AC/DC released the legendary album Back in Black as a tribute to the late vocalist. On the night of February 18, 1980, Scott met with some friends at a club in London. There he became heavily intoxicated before getting into a parked car belonging to his friend Alistair Kinnear. His friends thought he just needed to sleep off his drunkenness. However, on the morning of February 19, 1980, Bon Scott was still in the car. His friends found him unresponsive and slumped in the back seat, with the vehicle filled with vomit. Scott was immediately taken to the hospital, but his life could not be saved. Bon Scott died at the age of 33. Later, there was speculation that his vomit had entered his lungs, choking him to death. Ultimately, the cause of Bon Scott's death was found to be acute alcohol poisoning. Coupled with the initial confusing reports about his death, these facts sparked several conspiracy theories. Some even suggested he might have been murdered. Conversely, there is a possibility that drugs played a role in his death. Scott was known to use heroin, and many of the people he was with on his last night were reportedly associated with hard drugs. Despite the mysterious cause of Bon Scott's death, his heartbroken bandmates were forced to decide between quitting AC/DC or finding a new vocalist to replace him. They ultimately chose the latter option. Bon Scott was replaced by English singer and songwriter Brian Johnson, and AC/DC continued to enjoy success, particularly after the release of their album Back in Black, which debuted just 5 months after Scott's death. Some people speculate that Scott had written much of what was featured on the album. His former girlfriend claimed to have seen his journal with the lyrics to the famous hit song You Shook Me All Night Long before his death. Some feel that he deserves posthumous credit for the album, rather than his replacement Brian Johnson. In Bon the Last Highway by Fink, he quotes an interview with Angus Young acknowledging that Scott's lyrics were at least partially used, and Vince Lovegrove stating that Scott's family received royalties for Back in Black. However, Scott helped launch the band into fame and was instrumental to their early success as a group. Scott's body was returned to Australia, where his grave became a sacred place for those who appreciate the unique lyrics he brought to the band. As Vince Lovegrove, a member of the early band where Scott played, said, "The thing I liked most about Bon Scott is that he was almost unique. What you saw is what you got. He was a real and honest person all day long. In my opinion, he was the street poet of my generation and the next." His gravesite has become a cultural landmark. More than 28 years after Scott's death, the National Trust of Australia declared his grave significant enough to be included on the secret heritage list. Reported to be the most visited grave in Australia on July 7, 2006, to mark what would have been his 60th birthday, the Metropolitan Cemeteries Board completed renovations in the Bon Scott grave area. A bronze statue of Scott was unveiled at the Fremantle Fishing Boat Harbour in Western Australia on February 24, 2008. The statue depicts Scott atop a Marshall amplifier,